I like my introductions really brief. Anyway, thank you so much. It is great to be here to celebrate the work of the Fowler Center and the people who made it possible, Chuck and Char Fowler. Many of you will be familiar with the quote from Yeats, "Education is not the filling of a bucket, but the lighting of a fire." When Professor David Cooperrider taught Chuck Fowler in an EMBA class about 20 years ago, I think, he ignited a passion in the remarkable leader of Fairmont Minerals. Chuck, in turn, brought that passion back to the people of his company. Appreciative Inquiry Summits helped members of the Fairmont Minerals community, and they, in turn, contributed to increasing success within the company. Fairmont's motto is do good, do well, and that is exactly what it does. And we are so fortunate to have in our family at Case Western Reserve two extraordinary people in Chuck and Char, and also, of course, in Bill and Mary Conway, who have made the Fairmont Minerals legacy come alive and do what it does for our community. The company's motto, which is to exemplify the work of sustainable value, is all about investing in people. And it supports the immediate community, it supports the environment at large, and the company consistently searches for better, smarter ways to live its values. And as Professor Cooperrider teaches, these practices actually pay off. Today, Fairmont Minerals is the third largest industrial sand producer in the United States. It has an employee retention rate of 86%, which is dramatically higher than industry standards. In 2010, it increased its employee base by 20%, and in that same year, sustainability initiatives generated $9.3 million in value for the company. As laudable as these numbers are, another figure is even more impressive. In 2010, every single staff member at Fairmont Minerals volunteered time for a charitable organization or a cause. That is an amazing record. Every single person. I don't think there are many organizations who could say that. Chuck himself wrote in the company's corporate sustainability report, "This represents one of the most significant and proud moments in our organizational history, and I can understand why." Chuck and Char, of course, personally live these values. Chuck serves on the Board of Trustees of Case Western Reserve University, and Char is vice president of the board of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, MoCA, which is very near and dear to our heart here at Case Western Reserve. Their philanthropy collectively has touched a number of organizations around our community. And the Fowler Center for Sustainable Value, which was created through Chuck and Char's very generous gift, has in turn contributed to the citywide project known as Sustainable Cleveland 2019, which is a far-ranging effort across our region to bring together people to worry about the future of Cleveland and its sustainability. And I've been privileged to be there, Chuck, at those meetings, and Char, and it's been wonderful to see the energy that has come out of the work that started here. And David Cooperrider has been a big part of that, and I'm sure he'll mention more about that. We've had other engagements ranging from the American Red Cross to the United Nations, and the creation of an MBA Institute for Sustainable Value, which, for those of you who don't know, is a one-year immersion program for MBA students at the Weatherhead School. In short, a fire first lit more than 2 decades ago literally touches thousands and thousands of people around the world. Our management students, the CEOs of the companies who are part of this, and even statesmen and NGO leaders in countries around the globe. Chuck and Char, thank you both so much for everything you do and for the way you live your values. We are so humbled by your gift and your commitment to our university, and so proud that you are part of our family at Case Western Reserve. Thank you very much.
So, well, first off, it is a real honor, of course, to be here on an important occasion like this. I actually didn't realize this was a kind of dedication until just about 20 minutes ago when Mohan clued me in. I kind of got that feeling, but I realized, see, I think the Fowler Center's been here a long time, because I think, of course, that David's started the Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit, and then Fowler's getting involved, and my good friend Roger becoming an executive director and all. So I just kind of thought it had been going on a long time. But so I thought it was really interesting when Mohan was explaining it to me, because on Friday, so this is a curious week, the beginning and end of the week. So here we're kind of commemorating this center, and Friday I host a closing session to celebrate MIT's 150th anniversary. And in that session, they said, well, we'd like, oh, I should turn this on. Sorry. Small error there. Sorry about that. You can hear me fine, though, right? The acoustics in this room are just great, so I don't really need this much. I'm going to move it down so it doesn't. In fact, if they can turn the volume down, because it just creates kind of an echo. Oh, that's great. You can turn the volume down, even better, just to keep the echoes away. So Friday celebrates MIT's 150th anniversary, and when they asked me if I would kind of host this closing session for that event, they wanted a bunch of CEOs, and I said, oh, God, it's going to be so boring. So then I wouldn't tell them who I was going to invite because I wasn't sure I could pull it off. But we're going to have Barbara Stocking, who's a very dear friend, who's the CEO of Oxfam, together with a man named Paul Pullman, who I've been wanting to meet, who's the CEO of Unilever. And I'll just mention a little bit why, because it's kind of a good illustration of, I think, some of the things I should be reflecting on with all of us. Today, there's literally a board-to-board strategic partnership between Oxfam and Unilever. It would have been unimaginable probably even 5 years ago, certainly 10 to 15 years ago. Unilever is one of the 3 biggest food companies in the world. Oxfam is one of the world's best-known social justice NGOs. In Europe, it's much better known than it is in the United States, because it's very famous for their campaigning. The whole fair trade movement really got launched by Oxfam. And if you are a kind of person who works for an Oxfam, your purpose in life is the transformation of the structural causes of rural poverty. What do you think you typically think about large global food companies? They're not exactly your hero, right? In fact, I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that the single greatest cause of poverty in the world today is our global food system. Not many of us think about that, but you think about it this way, it's not too hard. You hooked up all the world's kind of agricultural businesses into one global set of commodity markets, and what happens to prices over the long term in commodity markets? We're the beneficiaries of that. When was the last time you heard somebody complain in the middle of winter in Cleveland that the melon they were about to buy cost too little? But in order to buy that melon in the middle of winter in Cleveland or Boston, you look at the prices of the 6 largest traded agricultural commodities, or really the 20 largest agricultural commodities, traded commodities over the last 50 years, you see a steadily falling price, which is just what you expect for commodity markets. We're the beneficiaries, so we don't complain. We don't think much, of course, is that those are also the falling incomes of farmers around the world. Roughly 50 to 70 million of whom every single year migrate from rural to urban environments to live in slums and shantytowns. Right? For us to have cheap melons in the middle of winter. Now, so you can kind of feel if that's kind of your passion, partnering up with a global food company is not easy. But Barbara, who's really a remarkable leader, she was in the British National Health Service before she took on the job of Oxfam, kind of had one lever that she used, really brilliantly, because it's so countercultural for them to have built this strategic partnership. But she basically, after her first year or 2 on the job, I think she started in 98 or so. She's now Dame Barbara Stocking. Barbara would just go to her people and say, what's our mission? They said, well, our mission is the eradication of poverty in rural environments in the developing world. Great, how are we doing? Well, everybody who's there is pretty knowledgeable about the facts. It would be hard to argue that it's a lot better than it was 50 years ago. There's more people trying to live on $1 a day today in the world than were alive on the planet 130 years ago. Then she said, well, we have to keep thinking about our strategy. If we're not really accomplishing our mission, we have to keep asking, and so people immediately say, well, it's because, and say all the reasons, all the other people who are the other institutions, of course, right at the top of their list will be global corporations, exploitative, global corporations who care only about shareholder return and whose executives only care about how kind of package they're going to retire on and on and on and on. You can imagine the rhetoric, and sincerely felt and not crazy. Then she kept saying, but how are we doing on our mission? Well, so you got the kind of picture. Eventually, she had enough people kind of persuade the fact that maybe, just maybe, and I'm not saying this, I'm going to be careful how I say this, it's not like the answer, but if you kind of put in the context of a journey like organization like Oxfam, maybe there will be no transformation of the systemic or structural causes of rural poverty in the world that isn't ultimately a commercial transformation, that doesn't take advantage of commercial systems to innovate. Today, Unilever and Oxfam have this board-to-board partnership with the goal that Unilever will have at least 500,000 smallholders in their global food chains by 2020. You can go on their website and see this. What that means is they have to totally transform how they manage their global supply chains. So that smallholders, who are the people who are being driven into poverty, it's not like that land is being destroyed, although we have lost half the topsoil in the world in the industrial age, but usually it gets aggregated into big, more industrial scale agricultural production facilities. To have smallholders in your global food chains mean they've got to be innovators. They've got to be able to kind of do what a global enterprise needs, which is to innovate, to continually improve what you do. There has to be a level of education. There has to be a level of sophistication technically that just simply doesn't exist. So it's quite an undertaking. If you also look at Unilever's website, you'll see they are committed to source all inputs to all their products sustainably by 2020. So that's just a story of which there are a lot. And I always have a little bit of mixed feeling telling stories like this, and I'll tell you why. Like classic question, probably many of you get asked, I certainly get asked all the time, do we have enough time? Are things getting better or worse? And my answer is, I don't know. And yes, things are getting better and things are getting worse. Okay? There's a lot of wonderful stories in the world, like the story of Unilever and Oxfam. And the National Geographic has said we have till 2020 to save 20% of the oceans. So it's not a complicated thing to understand. Yep, the kinds of innovations that are needed are occurring. And nope, the scale and speed is nowhere near adequate. So if you just think in terms of slopes of curves, the curve is still downward heading in so many ways. The rate of descent is slowing. Okay? That's important, because you're not going to turn these curves around until the rate of descent starts to slow. But we're still putting a lot more carbon in the atmosphere than's coming out. In fact, very few people even know how much comes out. But if we want to stop that rate of descent and stabilize CO2 in the atmosphere, we'd need about an 80% reduction in emissions worldwide in the next 20 to 30 years. That's kind of a consensual estimate on the part of climate scientists. And it may very well be that the greater consequence of burning fossil fuels to have our cheap energy, which we love. You might say, well, I don't think energy is so cheap. When was the last time you saw a business plan that was significantly influenced by the cost of energy? That's what I mean by cheap. For all intents and purposes in this country, energy is free. We complain when our gasoline goes to about half of what it is in Europe, and it's nowhere near taking into account the cost of actually running that fossil fuel-based economy. As I say, it might very well be that the larger cost of burning all these fossil fuels will turn out to be the acidification of the oceans than the destabilization of climate. The Mesoamerican reef is the second largest reef system in the world. It's lost 50% of its biodiversity in the last 15 years. And the reefs are the key to the biodiversity of the oceans, which, by the way, even though we don't live in them, we evolved out of that a long time ago, are pretty crucial to the well-being of the terrestrial ecosystems. So, yes, things are getting better, and yes, things are getting worse. Again, it's not a complicated picture if we just kind of appreciate, as I say, slopes of curves. So, it's a very kind of crucial moment. So it's probably, hopefully, this is a respectful way to acknowledge the founding of this center, as I hope it will be a respectful way to acknowledge MIT's 150th birthday on Friday. But, we're in a kind of a moment in history. I mean, I think it's kind of crazy to think that we don't know enough to really make the changes in the scale we need. We do know enough. That's the reason the kind of good signs are so important. It's not just a matter of intellectual arguments or economic analyses that say really the cost
is there, the benefit is there. It's in terms of tangible, on-the-ground accomplishments. And you would not see organizations like Unilever making the commitments they are making unless they thought somehow, although it's a huge stretch, it's not impossible. Nike has made the exact same commitment. You go on their website, they're going to have zero waste, zero toxicity, complete closed-loop production of all products by 2020. Do they know how to do that? Nope. Are they confident that they're on a path they could get there? Yeah, otherwise they wouldn't make that kind of formal commitment. Now let me ask you a question. This is a little bit of my data gathering because I'm asking this. I've asked this now for about 7 or 8 months around the country. Anybody know what China's committed to in this area of emissions and climate change? I'll be more specific in a minute because I can tell by your looks that you're not even sure what I'm referring to. In October of this past year, 2010, the party announced that for the first time in 35 years, the 5-year plan, the rolling 5-year plan, has single-digit growth as a goal. It's not double digits, single, 7 to 8%. And that they will reduce the carbon intensity of the Chinese economy by 40 to 45% by 2020. If you multiply those two, you will realize that somebody has thought this through. The Chinese Communist Party has committed to level emissions in this decade. How many of you know that? One hand. That should tell us all something. In this world where we've learned a lot from David about the importance of appreciating things, how come we've missed what everybody around the world has been saying is so desperately needed from a governmental and political standpoint? One of the big emitters, we know who the other one is, right? We're sitting here, making a bold commitment to significantly decarbonize its economy. China has done it, and almost nobody in the U.S. knows. So obviously we've got a lot to learn about appreciating the things that are building. Now, by the way, I'm not saying they know how to do it. I am saying they're very serious. I spend a fair amount of time in China. Believe me, they are very serious. And I'll tell you exactly how it's happened. This will kind of fit also, I think, with the deeper theme of the importance of appreciation. Because I always had a little bit of problem with that word. Because, it's like, how many times do you want people to pat you on the back? Don't you get a little tired of that after a while? That's different sort of appreciation. Like, you're a terrific person, you're a terrific person. It's like your mother says things like, you say, would you please stop? I know I've heard that. Now, appreciation is noticing. It's the art of noticing that which you want to see get created in the world as it's emerging. It's an art of noticing. It's not, making everybody feel like they're the world's greatest gift. But a lot of times we see these problems and we don't know how to notice that what's needed in response is actually occurring. Right now, what's happening in China is pretty simple. There are I always get it mixed up, 34 provinces, I believe, in China, 33 or 34. Each of them has just gone through a planning process where they've allocated that 40 to 45% carbon intensity reduction goal, province by province. Some provinces are big manufacturers, others are big coal burners, so on. So they had to allocate it in a way that's equitable and will add up to a 40 to 45% reduction for the entire economy by 2020. And right now, each of those provinces is going through a planning process of their shift in fuel mix and energy intensity. So 2 things you multiply to get carbon intensity. How much energy do you need per GDP, and then what sort of mixes of fuels, and what's the carbon intensity of the different fuel mixes. Each province is going through a detailed planning process to come to what their plan will be for meeting these targets. Now, does that mean they'll meet it? Of course not. Plans are plans. We all know that. But believe me, they are serious. And I'll tell you what's shifted. I spent about a month a year in China for the last decade or so. It's been my feeling for a long time. It's a very important country. It's kind of a pivot in a way. In many ways, this country has big difficulties, and the whole area of climate change really signifies them in some ways. We have a big investment to what we got, to be blunt. And when you're in a state of fear, and you've got a big investment to what you got, you have a very natural psychological and emotional reaction to hold on. Learning how to let go is not easy. Every parent knows that, right? Because you got this big investment to hold on. But sooner or later, you have to let go. China, as a developing country, has a lot less investment to the past and a lot more of an orientation towards the future. It's not, hard to appreciate the difference there. That said, I'll tell you what I think has really shifted. China is going to lead the energy revolution. They know it. They will be selling thin film photovoltaics, the latest in battery technology, and the whole suite of decarbonized energy sources to the world. So what is a huge problem, and it is a huge problem for them, they are, by most measures, the largest emitter in the world. They passed the U.S. They went from half the U.S.'s carbon emissions to exceeding the U.S.'s carbon emissions in a decade. Okay? So it is a huge problem. And of course, because coal is their primary source of energy, it's also a huge problem in terms of particulate emissions and all the consequences of burning coal. All of a sudden, it's now not only a huge problem, it's a huge opportunity. I visited a company just outside of Beijing, typical kind of Chinese company. This was in April when I just came back about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it started in 1988, 1990. I've never seen an energy company that's got the whole portfolio. Everything you would want to see in terms of alternative, non-carbon source of energy are in their portfolio of products, plus algae. Because one of the more interesting ideas about, China will burn coal, don't get me wrong. It has no option. Because this is the kind of core dilemma a country gets into, a business gets into. They don't have the option of not meeting energy needs. They have to dramatically improve their energy efficiency and simultaneously accelerate this transition to low-carbon sources of energy. They will burn a lot of coal in that transition. There's no way they won't. Because even more than us, they have very few options. We, of course, burn a lot of coal. I'm sure most of you know that. I asked today at lunch, I asked Andrew, because I figured Andrew would know in Cleveland, what's your distribution of sources of electricity in terms of fuel source in greater Cleveland?
100% coal.
Pardon me? Go ahead. He said he thought it was 80% coal. That's not too unusual. It's pretty typical of the Midwest, and the U.S. is 60 to 70% as a country. Right? So every time we think about our really sophisticated gadgets, right? I always love this image. All these wonderful, fancy gadgets we have. Just remember when we plug them in the wall, somewhere somebody burns some coal. So it's really not as sophisticated as you might think if you look at the system as a whole. The same fuel source has powered most of the industrial age. So 150 years ago, 200 years ago, it's no different today. The only difference is we just don't see the system. So China's do that. They also are world leader in building large operations. I can't think of the exact technical name for this. But basically, one of the more compelling ideas, if you really have to decarbonize your economy and you're going to use a lot of coal, is you sequester the coal biologically. You sequester the carbon biologically at generation through large algae plants. And you give the carbon to who wants it. Who wants it? Living things, right? They all want carbon. They want lots of carbon dioxide. That's their food. That's why the green things and us coexist. What we give off, they eat, and what they give off, we breathe. Right? That's called nature's symbiosis. So they're even including large algae farms, which they are experimenting with putting on the top of the coal-fired power plants, and you will eat the CO2 in the form of algae-based food products. So I just say that to illustrate. I mean, and again, it's not like the answer, but if we're looking for what's needed in the world, it's happening on all kinds of scales. Is it happening fast enough? No, not yet. Are we in kind of this? Yeah, I think for sure. So the one other thing which I think is a little harder still to see, again, in this spirit of appreciating as noticing what you really hope to see on a large scale emerging, I've often thought that the deeper the really deepest and toughest questions underlying sustainability are all basically cultural. You know, to put it really bluntly, as Linda mentioned, you know, it's kind of like one question here, really. It's not complicated. How on earth will we actually all live together? That's it. Because we won't live together the way we're living now. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. None of us have a crystal ball. But I think you can say that with some certainty. You know, a species cannot live destroying the conditions for its living. And we're busy doing that. And the interesting thing is, none of us are doing it intentionally. I mean, to me, it's kind of like the metaphor of why systems, what systems viewpoints are all about. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, gee, it's a beautiful day. I think I'll destroy some species. Right? It's a gorgeous day. Let me see if I can destabilize the climate a little more. Or destroy some coral reefs. No, but it happens as a byproduct of the way we live. So we just won't keep living this way. That's kind of obvious. And I'm sure that in saying it in such simple terms, it's not something that everybody agrees with. So I'm not asking you to agree with me. It's more a provocation, you know. Consider it. It seems to me like it's a very ponderable question given the facts of our life. And you can make the similar arguments on the social that you can make on the environmental or ecological imbalances. Really. Water. We're right on the edge of having a whole new operational definition of poverty. Because all definitions of poverty are actually pretty arbitrary. You know, and they're economic. And they're often full of lots of prejudices based on people who have a lot of material well-being and people who don't have a lot of poverty. You say, well, those poor people, they don't have what I have. So whether it's $1 a day, $2 a day, who knows? But I have a little graph I sometimes show. It's actually a picture of India and China with their current water shortage and their prospective water shortage. The summary of the picture from the World Health Organization, 2030, India and China will be unable to meet half their water needs if current trends continue. So there's the new operational definition of poverty. It's not an arbitrary economic definition. You do not have access to clean drinking water, you are a poor person. Why? Pretty simple. Same reason you see destruction of coral reefs. You've got three different forces, you know, colliding. You've got simple economic growth, but it's not the population part of it. That's really a small part. It's really the industrial part. As you improve your material well-being, your diet changes. It happens all around the world. As people eat more meat, the water intensity of their food system goes up dramatically. It takes a lot more water to produce a calorie of beef or most meat products than it does a calorie of grains. It just goes through a few more stages that all need more water. Okay? Secondly, you've got the pollution byproducts of industrial development. And thirdly, you've got the wild card. It is a wild card. No one really understands what to expect in terms of how rapidly glaciers will melt. But if you travel through northern Italy, northern India, you will see dry riverbeds everywhere. And China is fed by three major river systems which emanate from the Tibetan Plateau. So there's two countries, obviously growing, increasingly prosperous countries who face a big issue. And by the way, there's no substitute for water. You know, so where economics 101 sort of fails. You know, well, the price goes up, you substitute something. Well, the price goes up, you'll use it more efficiently, of course. But there really is no substitute. And I think I've never heard anybody make a compelling argument that we will desalinate enough water to provide drinking water for the, 3 billion people, which is that projection, by the way. 3 to 3.5 billion people without access to drinking water by 2030. Now, so, yep, the trends need to shift. And I offer that little picture, not just as a harrowing picture, but to kind of, again, remind us that deep down these problems really are cultural. Until we wake up in the morning and have this kind of awareness that we really are living in each other's backyards. The way I live in my day-to-day choices affects people on the other side of the planet. I don't see a lot of hope for these things being solved. I think that the encouraging signs are there, but if you kind of look at that, it's getting better and it's getting worse, what's going to ultimately be needed to really turn the whole curve, not just slow the descent, but turn it? I think I can't see any solution that's not ultimately cultural. Now, what do I mean by cultural? How we live, how we think, the mindset that guides us. So Linda made that comment about love. It's really interesting. I thought, well, that's interesting. So just share with you, and by the way, when I look at, kind of try to appreciate what's emerging, and of course this is always going to be a personal observation. Again, I could not prove this to you with data, but there's a couple of things I've noticed that seem to really be happening and which are, noteworthy in the spirit of appreciation. The couple of things are, one, that when people like Oxfam are willing to form strategic partnerships with people like Unilever, they're willing to let go of a whole set of assumptions, which are basically rooted in the emotions of anger and fear. And say, well, we don't know, but let's work together. You do not transform systems without transforming the relationships of the people in the systems. At some level, what's most systemic is most personal. I've been around a lot of people doing really interesting, radical things in transforming global food systems. What does it take to manage a food system that might span thousands of miles, which is very typical of food production distribution systems today, in a way that you're managing for the health and well-being of the whole system. And as a woman at Costco must have today 30 or more major experiments going on trying to manage the whole of key food distribution systems, which might span thousands of miles, typically do, with the idea that the well-being of the farmers and the well-being of the fishing communities and the well-being of the topsoil, which determines ultimately the well-being of those farmers, is part of our system. And woman, Sherry Fleece, who's been the kind of big driver in Costco this year, says really simply, she said, we used to buy food from wholesalers. We now buy food from farmers. They really are part of our system. So at some level, it begs an important question, which is kind of what's the emotional underpinnings? So I got thinking about that when Linda made her comment. And I'm going to give it to you in a scientific form. It should be fitting for the kind of common culture we all share, probably many of us in this room, fitting for a Case Western Reserve or an MIT. So here's a scientific explanation for a simple proposition that human beings are loving beings. You all know this one? I credit the person who helped me understand this is a very famous biologist, Chilean, named Humberto Maturana, very eminent as a evolutionary theorist. And Humberto has a wonderful point. He says, well, we all know in the theory of evolution that this, the opposable thumb, is considered one of the defining features of this species. Now, it's actually not unique to us. The bonobo chimps also have an opposable thumb. But the standard argument of the evolutionary biologist is it makes us tool users. We can grasp things. So this is a species that manipulates. We're technologists. We're tool makers. Then it develops in a mindset that whatever is around us, we can modify. It's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. He makes one interesting additional point. He says, but of course, you got to keep in mind, Humberto is Chilean, so he does this in a Latin manner. He says, we forget it also allows us to caress. Human beings are loving animals. We're designed. This is not about morality or ethics or any religious system. It's about understanding our biology. Look, we're not particularly fast. We're not particularly strong. What gives us our advantage? We actually have extraordinary capacities to accomplish things together. And you only accomplish things together through transforming the relational underpinnings of how you're doing things. He also has a lovely definition of love. He realizes as a biologist, he's a very eminent biologist, the group he was part of at MIT as a postdoc, eventually several of those people won a Nobel Prize for their work on cognition, first biologically based theory of cognition, how a living system creates perception. He also realizes when he goes around, as he's been doing now for the last 20 years, writing about the biology of love, that he better be clear what he means. So here's Humberto's definition of love. I think all this kind of was sparked by Linda's introduction. Love is the act of allowing another to be a legitimate other. Love is the act of allowing another to be a legitimate other. They do not have to conform to my expectations. They can actually be themselves. When human beings relate to each other from that foundation of you can actually be yourself, of course, most of us would just call that respect. You could call it profound respect, a rose by any other name. But it does point to something very important. Transforming systems, in my experience, is always about transforming relationships. And we have a wealth of innate understanding of what this takes. Love is the act of allowing another to be a legitimate other, to be who they are. That, I believe, will be a cultural underpinning of a sustainable society. Because without that, I don't see any way we're going to achieve the changes we need to achieve. And having said it, all I can say is I see it all around. That's something to start to appreciate. So, thank you.
It was almost 23 years ago to this day, May 9th, 1988, that one of the quietest executives in my executive MBA class came up on the last day of the semester and said, "Thank you. This class meant a great deal to me. There's some good ideas I think I can use." That's it. Terribly concise. No extra words. No extra words. No fluff. Just a sincere and rock-solid thank you. This class meant a lot to me. I'll get back to you, David. We'll talk. And he did. And when Chuck returned, he was filled with ideas, a conviction, really, about creating an empowered and engaged workforce in a company of equals where everyone thinks and acts like owners of the business. It was one of those early conversations that I felt something that I think everyone who interacts with Chuck Fowler feels. He makes you feel important. He wants to know and learn everything he can. For you see, Chuck puts everybody from the shop floor to UN leaders on a pedestal, and then they return the favor. I was with Chuck and Char, for example, last year in a session with at Eager, our engineering and management students. And they were college volunteers who were taking their talents to developing countries. They were designing renewable energy prototypes, working with the poor to improve lives, helping invent custom technologies for growing healthy food, and bringing energy and light to medical clinics. Well, during that session, when the students were doing all the teaching, Chuck was beaming. He was taking in this youthful optimism. And as some of us know Chuck, when he's overflowing, he doesn't say much at all, but he just starts rubbing his hands, And then he says very few words, but he said, this is outstanding. This will work. This is good stuff. I'm now convinced that this is where Chuck's leadership is nurtured. I'm seeing him do this with our work with Kofi Annan and the UN Global Compact, with everyone in his own company, from the sand loader operator to the customer and board member. I've seen him light up the room with big-name scholars, such as C.K. Prahlad, as well as 1,000 teenagers in a summit that he supported, creating their vision of a bright green high school at Notre Dame Cathedral. For Chuck Fowler, it's not about motivating others or getting them to do things but it's about filling himself with such goodness and sense of potential and a pragmatic sense of meaning, purpose, and value. Yes, you can't help but believe Chuck, his authenticity and his integrity when he speaks. I was thrilled some years ago when he wanted to use our AI large group methodology to bring the whole system together to launch this sustainability effort. And it was courageous, He didn't have a strategic plan in his back pocket, but was inviting every stakeholder in our community, in his community, every stakeholder of the business, from customers to NGOs and so on, to help participate and create that future. No premeditated plan in the back of Chuck's back pocket. But I need to let you in on a secret. Prior to that meeting, we were getting ready for it, I had a conversation with Chuck, and it was it stands out as probably the most unusual conversation I've had with a business leader in my life. It was really, I asked, we got started talking about this. I said, Chuck, it's really important how you set the stage in the first few minutes of this summit like this. I asked, how are you going to introduce this call to sustainability, Chuck? Why is Fairmont Minerals doing this? You need to lay out the business case. I was, to be honest, expecting what you might expect, all the business reasons. Chuck said, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. It's morally right. That's what I'm going to say. That's nice, Chuck, I said, but Chuck, you need to say a little more. No, that's what I want to say. It's the right thing to do. We're doing this because doing good is the right thing to do. Now, usually I'd be thrilled by this kind of moral compass and leading with values and character, but strategy thinker Chris Laszlo and I were worried. We said, but Chuck, you better also say in your opening that we're doing this because it will help us be a more profitable and successful business. Sustainability could be a big business opportunity, Chuck. Chuck looked us directly in the eye as if we were not hearing him, and he said, we're doing this because it's the right thing. That's it. I don't want to confuse the message or communicate mixed motives. That's it. That's how I'm going to set the stage. Now, what's next? Next? Please join me once again in recognizing not just the gift of Chuck and Char Fowler, but join in celebrating their humanity, their example, and the torch that they've handed to all of us. It's called the Fowler Center for Sustainable Value.
Thank you all. Thank you. Is there a pedestal someplace that I can stand on? Good. Way too short for all of those accolades. Thank you. First of all, certainly, Char and I want to just thank you for the celebration we're having today. Thanks for putting this together. I want to welcome our family to being here, our grandchildren here, because it's really for you and the people that you'll be in your generations together that we're doing all of this great work. I want to thank all of our Fairmont family that's here. Thank you, and we'll spread the word around the rest of the organization as time gives us an opportunity. I was thinking about what I ought to really talk about, and I will be brief. Not that everyone else has not been brief, of course. But, and I really appreciate the fact that we got the center up and running, and we've got good staff. Mr. Dane is also here. He's our latest addition to the group. There he is. All right, glad to have you. And but a lot of the question comes around as to, well, why? Why'd you do this? Why a Center for Sustainable Development, and why at Case Western? The Case Western part's easy. I mean, I came here. I certainly had the opportunity of actually when I came in 1988 with Bill, who, by the way, my great business partner and mentor, and the guy that's led me through this. So thank you, Bill. Let's see, where are we? Okay. So why do we do this? And part of it is, as David talked about, is I've had the opportunity to give a lot of presentations. As a matter of fact, our group gave me the goal. The first year after we started sustainable development, they gave me a goal to do 17 presentations that year. Now, I have really no idea where 17 came from, but whatever. But we did that. We made that goal, which was one of 59 goals the first year out. Was it? Most companies do like 4 goals. Nah, we do 59. We had how many this year? 56 goals this year. Al's the tabulator. But so one of those goals was to give presentations. So I have done a lot of presentations, as have many of us now. I've now had to incorporate some other folks into giving presentations because we get a number of requests for what are we doing, what's the sustainability. And I start out my presentation, actually I'm getting one tomorrow morning, so if anybody wants to show up at 7:30 in the morning down at the Union Club, you can hear another presentation. The first slide that I put up is to why we do this is just what David said, because it's the right thing to do. And that should be enough. I just go sit down and have breakfast or something. But generally more people want to know more because they at least came to a presentation, so they expect something more than just it's the right thing to do. But that's really all the answer is that it's absolutely the right thing to do. So we get into then why, and we get into all the reasons we ought to be doing this, and all the reasons why it works, why it's SD pays, which is a goal that we have, and we're able to calculate all that and so forth. But you heard a lot of those same whys from Peter today, talking about some of the issues that go around the world. And one of the things that I hear back from the business people that I'm talking to is that, well, okay, we really understand that, but then the question is, how? How do we do this? Okay, that's the why there's a Fowler Center for Sustainable Value. Because we need, and academia, and particularly the Weatherhead School, needs to build the how. How do companies, what's the roadmap that companies can use to put in their sustainable development effort and get it involved and get it trained into their organization. And that's why we're here. That's the charge. That's the charge of and not only for businesses in our communities and around the world, but also for our students. Because, this Generation Y student group, they get it. They really want to take this in, and they really want to do good in the world. And they want to do good in their job, not just do good in their own little lives, but they want to do good in the world. And we've got to show them how. So I know that David and Mohan and the whole curriculum, and we're actually getting it into a few other schools. Thank you, Barbara. So that we can spread this word and get this to more and more of our students. And at the same time, we'll be collecting that data, collecting that opportunity from the Fowler Center to be able to spread the word out in the industry, give them the studies and the cases to be able to make that happen. This is not I don't want to say anything derogatory about academics and so forth, but in many cases, you need something to teach. You need a case. You need something, because you don't know it all of everything in the world. So those ideas that we can spread around to the rest of the world are really the important factor that Roger has the opportunity to do. And one little sideline, the Fowler Center has been named the coordinator for the UN Global Compact for North America, right? That's a small place. So we're really proud of that and proud of the work that we're doing. And Linda and Roger just had a meeting last week in New York City at the UN Global Compact, and I'm getting a lot of great reports from that. So thank you for that good work. So there's plenty of opportunity for the center to do. We hope that we can keep it going, and thank you for the Case Western for helping us support that and keep it making it happen. And Char and I would just like to thank you all for being here, and thank you for helping us support.